Okay, our first unit is going to talk a little bit about what's called systems of numeration, because how we write numbers and how we write arithmetic that we take for granted is not the way people have always thought about math or the way things have always been written down. So this first couple sections is going to give you a little bit of perspective of some of the history of math and a little bit of the way that thinking about math has developed. So section 4.1, we're going to talk about the first couple types of what's called systems of numeration. We're going to talk about the additive, which is a fun word to say and spell. This one's great, multiplicative, and the cipher systems. Okay, so the first thing that I'm going to tell you about here is that if we're talking about a quantity, if we are talking about how much of something or how many of them, what we use is we use a number. So a number, this is the first blank on the sheet. A number is a quantity that answers So numbers don't change from culture to culture, people group to people group. If you're counting 3 sheep, it's 3 sheep here, it's 3 sheep somewhere else. What changes and how it reflects people's thinking about numbers is in numerals. A numeral is the symbol that represents numbers. Even now, in present day Earth, you can go to different countries and there are different numerals that are used. Now, the one that is most prevalent throughout humanity right now is what we use, which is called the Hindu-Arabic system. Well, let me not say system there. Let me say Hindu-Arabic numerals. So this reflects a little bit of the history of the numbers and the symbols that we take for granted. Okay, so it's very much related to what happened in the Middle East and what happened in India, where a lot of what we use came from and how it developed, and then it interacted with Europe and Northern Africa, and so all sorts of things. But just so that when I use the words Hindu-Arabic as we go through our notes today, that is what I'm calling our system of numbers that you've been using since kindergarten. Okay, so these two things together, numbers and numerals, and then the other symbols, the operations and things that go into it is what's called a system of numeration. It's more of a smudger than an eraser. Not good. So a system of numeration. The system of numeration consists of the set of numbers and the rules for combining those numbers, for combining them to represent different quantities. Okay, so that last blank right above the words additive system is the system of numeration. So we're going to start at its most basic. Okay, so archaeology tells us how these different things were used. The first system is called an additive system. And in an additive system, the number represented by the numerals is just found by adding up the numeral values. And historically, there's lots of different, there's a lot of different kingdoms and empires and cultures that use this. The first example, there's going to be 2. The first one we're going to talk about is Egyptian hieroglyphics. And I've got a box there of the numerals that we're going to use. And so the first column is the Hindu-Arabic equivalent, meaning our equivalent. And then the next column is the Egyptian numerals that they have. And so there's a description on what those things are if you want to know. You don't have to memorize the names of it. What you need to know how to do is to use it. When you take your test on January 26th, if I'm remembering right, it's going to look just like these problems that are coming below this. So I'm going to show you how to use this additive system, and then you're going to practice it on your homework, and then I'm going to just see, did you remember how to use it when the test comes around? So example 1 gives us this number right here. We've got a couple of pointing fingers, and then we've got some scrolls, 4 scrolls, and then a heel bone, and then it looks like we've got 5 lines. And so because this is an additive system, it's the simplest system. It's how people thought about numbers first. And all you do is you go through and say, okay, each of these pointing fingers represents 10,000. So I've got 2 of them. So that represents 20,000 plus. Each of these scrolls represents 100. So since there's 4 of them, that's 400. A heel bone represents 10. And then each of these little marks represents 1. And so that's 5. So again, the thing that I'm hoping you take away from this is if you were an Egyptian trader or somebody that was recording something, I just read something fascinating. I'll share with you in a minute. But if you were in this system, you would not do something like a mental, we are doing this because this is how we think about numbers. But if you were Egyptian, you would have looked at this and you would have known, right? Because these are the symbols you're used to translate that into numbers. Okay, so now what we'll do is we'll just add these up. So we get 20,415. So this is what the Egyptian hieroglyphic represents. This is what the Hindu Arabic represents. They represent the same quantity, but 2 different ways of thinking about numbers. When we come back next week, we're going to talk about the particulars of our system. Our system, thinking ahead, is what's called a place value system, because we only have 10 numerals, right? 0 through 9. But depending on where I put the 0 through 9, they mean something different. So that's called a place value system. Okay, and that's kind of, we are at kind of the apex right now. Who knows if in the future there'll be some other sort of number system, maybe, maybe not. But right now we have a place value system. So if you would, for me, right below that is exercise 1. I've given you a different hieroglyphic. If you would please write down what the number value is in Hindu Arabic. Right, again, so it's just a matter of linking up what each of these symbols means on the test. On your homework, you're going to have the chart. The big thing is just knowing how to use the system. And so for the additive system, it's just saying, okay, each of these represents something. So the pointing finger represents 10,000. The lotus flower, which I am not a great drawer, so please forgive me, is each of those is 1,000, so that's 2,000. The scrolls are 100, so that's 300. The heel bones are 10, so that's 40, and then 1. Anybody get something different that we have to talk about? Remember, if you've got a question at any point through what we're doing today, please let me know. There's no bad questions. Questions mean you're learning and interacting, so that's great. So we've got 12,341. Just because it's fun and it incorporates my favorite of the Egyptian hieroglyphics, do exercise 2, please. All right, so my favorite one is the astonished person, which you would understand. A million of anything's astonishing, right? If somebody walked in with $1 million, you'd be like, yeah, so there's the astonished person. Each astonished person represents 1 million, so that's 3 million. If you don't mind, I'm not going to write out all of the different values. So we've got 3 million, and then we've got our tadpoles. Tadpoles are 100,000, and there's 3 of them, so 300,000. I don't need a comma there. Then the next one is we've got the scroll, which is 100. So I don't have any fingers. I don't have any lotus flowers. And then I have 1, 2, 3, 4 of those. 3 heel bones is 30, and then 1. Yeah.
Is there any significance to the way that's written, as opposed to being just a straight line?
When you look, in all honesty, when you look back at the clay tablets, so I can't speak for the way they were thinking about it, but this is the way things were written on the clay tablets as a line. Now, things might have been a little more jumbled than we do. You know, you kind of see I've got things ordered, but sometimes the tablets are a little more jumbled, but it's all linear like that. Okay. And that's not, so how you're seeing it here is how I'm going to present it to you. I'm not going to suddenly change formats on you when the test comes around. All right, so flip the page. You're still going to be using that table of Egyptian hieroglyphics, but this time we're going to go backwards. So I want you to take the Hindu Arabic number 1,203,462 and write it as a hieroglyphic, please. Okay, so it's just a matter of using the proper number of symbols. Again, it's completely additive. For this first one, I've broken our Hindu Arabic number up into its component parts. I'm not going to do that for the next one, but 1,203,462 represents 1 quantity of 1,000,000, 2 quantities of 100,000, 3 quantities of 1,000, 4 hundreds, 6 tens, and 2 ones. And now I'm just going to go through the table that we have, and I'm going to write down the symbols. So 1,000,000 is the astonished person. So there we go. The 200,000 means I need 2 tadpoles like that. 3,000 means I need 3 lotus flowers, which I'm challenged about. And then 4 hundreds is 4 scrolls, and then 6 heel bones, and then 2 ones. There we go. Any questions about that? If you just have them all written out linearly, I know I stacked the fish, and I know I stacked the scrolls. If you just wrote them all out linearly, that's fine. Okay, it's not a big deal. The important thing to me here is just learning, making sure you understand additive system means I'm just adding up all these quantities. That's the big component here. So one more problem, and then we're going to go on to the next additive system. A little later in history, a little alteration was made to it. I'd like you to do exercise 3, 430,613. Just going through this, 400,000 is going to be 4 tadpoles. The 30,000 is going to be 3 pointing fingers. And then the 600s is 6 scrolls, 1 heel bone, and then 3 ones. And there we go, that's my point. Before I move on from the Egyptian hieroglyphics, any questions, comments, or concerns? All right, so then there's actually another really interesting additive system that we're not going to talk about, but I was just reading about over the weekend. The Sumerian system, the Sumerian Empire, they had one. It was an additive system, but they had different symbols because they had different tools, and their symbols were represent 1s and 5s and then 30s. So it began to reflect a little bit how they were really gravitating toward making a calendar. So it was 1s and 5s and 30s, and then I think it was 120s were what their symbols represented. So they thought about numbers completely different than the Egyptians and in different ways than we do. And that's an interesting thing about how math developed throughout history. So then we're just fast forwarding though up to the Romans because they did something interesting and novel. That's why it's worth mentioning. They're still at the core of it an additive system, but they did something different with their symbols so that they could minimize the symbols. So with the Roman system, if you put a bigger number in front of a smaller number, so for instance, if you're looking at the chart, V means 5 and dash means 1, that's equal to 6. Now, in general, the Romans wouldn't use more than 3 of the same symbol in a row. So instead of they would not have done 1, 2, in general, they would not have done 4 dashes to be 4. What would have been proper is if you put a smaller in front of a larger like this, I before V, it's subtraction now. And so now that would equal 4. And so that is why it's worth talking about, is because you can see that they began to think about things a little bit differently. Okay, so still at its core, it's an additive system, but they had this little twist. So example 3, which is my example, we're going to write this number as a Hindu Arabic, meaning as one of our numbers. So we've got M and then D and then a couple of C's, an L, a couple of X's, VI. So once again, it's just an additive system. The only thing you have to look for is if a smaller symbol comes before a larger. That means to subtract. So I start off with an M. M means 1,000, so I'm going to put 1,000 here. Now, again, as you get better at these, you don't have to write things out like I am, like adding up each of the values. But I'm doing this because we don't use the Roman system except for Super Bowls and copyrights on TV shows. Okay, so those are the only 2 times you really see Roman numerals. The D represents 500. The C represents 100, and there's 2 of them. The L represents 50. The X's represent 10, and there's 2 of them. The V represents 5, and then 1. So there's all of my addition. And so this number is going to be 1,776. So same thing for you. Exercise 4, straightforward, additive with the Roman numerals. It's the exact same thing we were doing with the Egyptian hieroglyphics. Okay, again, I'm just going to go through the numbers. I'm going to take the values of each of these letters and I'm going to add them up. This one, there's no subtraction on this one. Just wanted you to run through with these new symbols for the Roman system. So each of the M's represents 1,000, so that's 2,000. The C's represent 100, so that's 300. The X represents 10 and then 3, so we get 2,313 is the answer. Anybody get something different that we need to look into before I move on? I don't want to rush through anything on you if you have a question. So please don't let me move on if you're not ready for me to. All right, so now it's time to hit this novel thing about the Roman system that allowed them to not have to repeatedly write symbols. That was kind of their contribution to the numerals. And so example 4 says this: I have CMLXIV. So again, this is tough for us to think about, right? Because we're not used to seeing numbers this way. If you were a Roman person, if you grew up Roman and working with their numbers, you'd look at this and you'd know right away, right? You'd see it, but we have to look at the page. Okay, so it's uncomfortable for us because we're learning something new. But what we see is that the C comes before the M. So I've got a smaller before a larger. So when the C comes before the M, that is 100 subtracted from 1,000. So what does C before the M, what does that represent? 900. And then I've got an L and I've got an X. L is 50, X is 10, so all is good. So I'm going to write down my 50 and I'm going to write down my 10. And then again, you would see the same thing. If you were Roman, you would see this right away. It would stand out to you like a sore thumb. For us, we have to make sure we're paying careful attention. I've got the I in front of the V. So since there's a smaller in front of a larger, what does I in front of V mean? 4. Great. And so what we've got is 964 is the answer to that one. I would like you to do the same thing with exercise 5. It involves a little subtraction, so be careful as you're doing it. Okay, so exercise 5 is CDXL 1, 2, 3. So again, the C comes before the D, so that's 100 comes before 500. So the C in front of the D, that represents 400. The X comes before the L, the X is 10, the L is 50. So those two things together represent 40. And then we've got 3 ones. So again, at its heart, it's an additive system because I'm taking each of these values and adding them up. But in order to minimize the number of symbols I'm using, we have this, this subtraction. So that's 443. So the last couple of examples we're each going to do one is now we're going to take a Hindu Arabic number and we're going to do our best to translate it into Roman. So again, we've got the subtraction. The main rule for a proper Roman numeral, now if you go back in history, you will see that sometimes this rule gets broken, probably because my elementary school teachers always say not supposed to say ain't, but we still said ain't, right? And we knew what that meant. So not everything is always proper, but we're going to abide by the rule that you don't use more than 3 of a symbol in a row. Okay, so if you don't know that, I never heard that, write a little note to yourself. You don't use 3 of the same symbol in a row. So here we go. Exercise 6 is 439. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to do the first step here, and then I'm going to have you write down what you think the Roman numerals are going to be. So it's an additive system. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to write down what 400 represents, what 30 represents, and what 9 represents. So do your best. Okay, do your best at doing this. Remember, if you get something wrong, it's okay. It means you're learning, and it provides a good opportunity. I will say you're going to have to use subtraction twice on this one. Okay, 400. So if you wrote down 4 C's, that's not going to be right. Okay, because you're not going to have 4 of something. So that is your indication when you have to write down more than 3 of something that it's a subtraction. So instead of writing down 4 C's right here, what am I going to do to represent 400? I'm going to write a C in front of the D. This is subtraction. So that's 400. And then 30. Well, 30 is going to be what? Yeah, 3 X's. Okay, it's 3. You're allowed to do 3 in a row. So X, X, X. And then 9. Well, 9 could be a 5 and 4 ones, but again, that violates the rule of not more than 3 in a row. So what would you suggest? 1 in front of the X. Yes, 1 subtracted from 10 gives me 9. We're going to do one more example because I have one more little thing to tell you about Roman numerals, and then we'll be done with them, and we'll be done with the additive system, and we'll move on to the next type of system. So our last exercise here is exercise 7. We've got 12,345. So the 345, I'm going to assume you're going to be good with, and you're going to do that in just a minute. The trouble happens with the 12,000 because the biggest symbol that the Romans had was an M. And I just told you can't write it more than 3 times in a row, so I'm not going to write down 12 M's. So the other thing that you will see if you look at Roman numerals is they will use a bar to represent 1,000. So what I mean by that is this. What does this symbol right here represent? 5. So if I put a bar over it like that, that now means 5,000. So here's what you're going to do for me. For the 12,000, you are going to write down the number for 12, and then you're going to put a bar over it. So you're going to put the number for 12, and then you're going to put a bar over that number to make 12,000. And then the 345 is just going to be very similar to the 439 we just did. Okay, so how did you write 12? 10, 11, 12. Yes, XII. And then I'm going to put a bar over it. That means 12,000. 300. What am I going to do for 300? Yep, you can write 3 in a row. CCC. Great. 40. I can't write XXXX. That's 4. So how am I going to write 40? XL. And then finally 5 is a V. And there's your number. You can do VL. I wouldn't VL. Oh no, you would not do VL because we have the 40 and then we have the 5. That's the additive part of the system. Okay, so that would be skipping ahead. Good thought though. I probably wouldn't mark it wrong because that's good thinking, but that's not technically the right thing to do. Any other questions? Yeah.
Oh, sorry. I got C for the first one I did. I got C, X, L.
Okay, so XXL. Yeah, the problem here is this. It's a great thought. With the subtraction, it's only the number immediately preceding. So this wouldn't have meaning. This would be like 10 and then 40. And so it's not something you would see as far as the Roman numerals. So with the subtraction, this is a great point. Thank you for making sure I say it. The subtraction is only represented by a single digit in front of the larger one. Okay, great thought though. I like how you're thinking out of the box. Okay, so that's additive systems. So now we're going to go to a different part of the world. We're going to go forward in history a little more to the Chinese culture. They had what's called a multiplicative system. And so multiplicative system kind of begins to broach on what we have, a place value system that I talked about before. That's what ours are called, that the numerals we have different meanings depending on their place in the number. And so we're going to use the traditional Chinese. And what we're going to do in example 5, we're going to do this one together, is we're going to write the number 642 in traditional Chinese numerals. Now, one thing about the Chinese numerals is they don't write their numbers left to right. They write their numbers up and down. Okay, so we're going to abide by that. So how we're going to write this number is we're going to do this. We're going to start with 600 and then 40 and then 2. So again, you have all the symbols. I know it's a little awkward because you have to keep looking at the symbols because you were not immersed in this culture and this way of thinking. But here's what you do. To write 600, you want to tell somebody 6 hundreds. So you're going to take the symbol for 6, which I'm not a great artist. I'm not immersed in the traditional Chinese system. And then you're going to let everybody know that you're multiplying that by 100. So the 100 is this symbol right here. And I'm going to move my 40. I didn't leave myself enough room to do this adequately. I apologize for having to erase. So the symbol for 100 looks something like this. So again, we have to think very intentionally about this, but if you were Chinese, you would look and you'd read down and you go, okay, 600. Okay, 6 times 100. That would just click right to you. Just like for us, seeing the 6 in this place clicks for us, 600s. Okay, so it's this, we've been immersed in this. We don't even think about thinking about numbers, but now we have to because we're looking at something brand new. And then 40. So again, I've used the symbol for 4, which it looks like a little TV with a triangle in it. And then times 10, which is nice. Little cross there. And then the last one is 2. And so the symbol for 2 is 2 bars, one on top of the other. You don't have to write the 600, the 40, the 2. That's not part of the answer. The answer is this right here. So what I would like you to do, again, you're going to have to keep your thumb on the chart. The next one is exercise 8. I'd like you to write 2,538. Okay, so just going through this, I'm just breaking it up into my basic parts because this helps me think it through. If you don't need to do that, then by all means, you don't have to. So 2 is the 2 bars, and then the 1,000 is that symbol right there. So again, if you're Chinese and you're reading this, your brain would see that and say, okay, 2,000, there's my first grouping. And then the 500, the 5 looks something like this. And then the 100 is that right there. The 30, the 3 is 3 bars this time. And then the 10 is the cross. And then 8, you don't have to do 8 times 1. I forgot to mention that. You don't do 2 times 1. It's assumed that you're in the ones place when you're doing it. So the 8 is something like that. One other thing I want to mention about the Chinese multiplicative system is this. One of the great things and one of the reasons it's worth mentioning is not just because it's multiplicative, it's because the Chinese were one of the first cultures to have a symbol for zero, right? So for much of history, the only reason you would bother writing numbers down is if you had something to count. So it didn't make sense if you didn't have anything. So you'll notice the Chinese have a symbol. I know it's not super big. It looks like a face when it's a little bigger. Okay, that's the symbol for zero. Now the thing about zero is this. I've got 406 and I've got 4060. You would use zero when it's between numbers. You do not put a zero at the end if it's there at the end. So the zero is a placeholder when it's between numbers, but because it's multiplicative, because if you didn't have any units, you wouldn't need this here. You would just stop at your tens. So for 406, I've got 400s, I've got 0 tens, and then I've got 6. So here's how we would write 406. So 406, oh, I got to turn back here. I've got 4, which looks like this, and then 400s, which is this symbol. Now, since the 0 occurs between things, I'm going to draw the face, which I'm not meaning to any disrespect, but my eyes are really bad as an old man, and so I'm having trouble discerning the different things. So that's going to be my best attempt to draw the face. And then 6 is going to be that right there. Yeah.
Are we gonna have to memorize these to the?
Yes, everything, all these charts, you got to memorize them. I'm just kidding.
Okay.
I will give you the charts. You need to know what to do with them. You will get the charts fully. I've taught this class a bunch of times. I still don't have all the symbols memorized. Okay, so 4060, the only difference here, it would represent, the 4 now represents 4000s, and then I have 0 hundreds, I've got 60, and then 0 at the end. So the 4000 would be, the 4 would be this symbol, times the 1000. I don't have any hundreds, so I do the face. Again, sorry, no disrespect intended. First off, I'm not a good drawer, and second, I'm not a good seer anymore. So then 60 is this, and times the 10. And then since I have a 0 at the end, you'd see the times 10, you wouldn't do anything else. No face at the end of the number. So just for time's sake, if you would please do an exercise 10, just do the 708. Okay, not the 7080. You can do the 7080 later. It's just going to look the same thing as the 4060 with no face at the end.
Do they use this number system today?
They use a variation of it. Professor Zhu, he's from China. He's lived in the United States for like 22 years, but he and I were going through, some of the symbols are different, but the gist of it's the same.
The top to bottom.
Yeah, but they also learn the Hindu Arabic too. They do, you know, it's kind of like when you're in elementary school, there you learn the traditional system, then but to be part of the world system, they learn both. All right, so I just asked you to do the 708 just to get used to using the face there between the different place values. So my 700 is going to look like this. Here is 7, and then the 100 is this symbol right here. And then I'm going to put the face there in the middle because I'm representing 0, which is one of the interesting things about this system. And then the 8 is just going to be this symbol right here. Before we move on to the last system, the ciphered system, does anyone have any question, comment, or concern? All right, ciphered system. Again, the cipher system in a different way borders on looking sort of place value-ish, because you use the difference is you have different numerals for each place value, but there is the idea of place values. So we are going to look at the historic system, the Ionic Greek system. The Greeks, they used their letters as their numerals. By the way, if you are a fan of Bible stuff and you know the book of Revelation and the mark of the beast is 666, well, those were they were probably initials, okay, using the Greek letters for the initials of someone. So that's people have tried to figure that out for a long time, but in its context, that would have been how the numbers and the letters related. Anyway, that's an aside. So in example 10 here, the Ionic Greek, I'm going to represent 768. Well, it's pretty straightforward. Again, once you have the table with the symbols, I'm going to write down the symbol for 700, which is psi, so it looks like that. Then I'm going to go to the symbol for 60, which is Z. I was never good at drawing my Greek letters. And then the last one is 8, which is eta, which looks like an N with a long second half. So this is what 768 would have looked like in Ionic Greek. So if you would please, on the next page, exercise 11, a very straightforward problem of writing the number 584 in the ciphered system. So again, this difference from place value is they don't use the same numerals for each place. You wouldn't use the epsilon 5 here for 500. You would use the specific letter for 500, which is phi, which is the circle with something through it. And then for 80, you're going to use pi, which we're familiar with from our circles. And then for 4, you use delta, which is a D with a crazy tail in the wind. So one more thing to mention about the ciphered system, then you're almost through with me for the first day, is much like the Romans, the Greeks had a symbol to represent times 1,000. So you see I have a little blank. When you take the iota, which is an I without the dot, and you place that as a superscript before the numeral, so we just saw that delta was 4. If I put a little superscript iota right there, that now means 4,000. Okay, the iota, like the bar in the Roman numerals, means to multiply by 1,000. So just for time's sake, I would like you to please do this. Please write down what example 11 would be. Okay, so example 11, we've got 1,000. So I'm going to take the number 1. Number 1 is alpha, the first letter of the Greek alphabet. And I'm going to put a little iota right there, a little I without the dot. If you put a dot, I don't care. I'm not going to mark you wrong. because habit makes me want to do it. Then I'm going to do 600. 600 is chi, just a big X. And then 50 is nu, V with a little attitude there. And then 4 is delta, and there we go. So your last problem for the day, and then I'll stop the recording, and then you can go, and I'll see you on Monday, is exercise 13. Take that Greek number and write it as Hindu Arabic, please. For exercise 12, how would we deal with the 0? The Greeks didn't have a 0, so you would do great question. You would do the 5,000, you put the iota in front of the 5, and then you would just skip the hundreds, and then you would do whatever the 10 is. So again, it's not exactly a place value system. It's brushing up against it. Thank you. No, thank you for asking. Okay, so the nice thing about this system, though, is you don't have to look like the whole chart for tau. You can look toward the end because it's in this third position. And tau is 300. And then we've got lambda, and lambda represents 30. And then we've got beta, the second letter of the Greek alphabet, which is 2. So it's just a matter of finding the proper letter. So again, let me just say one more time. You don't have to memorize the charts. So when you're doing your homework, I'm pretty sure on all the problems, the charts are there. But if not, have your notes. That's why I take the time to put those together. You have to know what to do with the different systems. Okay, that is the challenge for you. I hope you have an amazing day, everybody. It was great to meet you today.